Jesus is often praised for his wisdom, for his clever comebacks, for his use of storytelling and parables and analogy as devices for learning, and for his ability to confound the opposition. Many have called him a genius for these measures. And I was of that mind when I was a believer as well. It is preached into us. This is the Son of God. This is the greatest man that has ever been and can ever be. So surely whatever we read about this man, even if we might feel one way about it or see it one way at one time, the truth that lies behind it must be supreme. If we have a negative view of it or a negative connotation with it, we must simply be wrong. After all, this is Jesus we are talking about. But one thing that was always in the back of my mind, and now since deconverting and reading these stories again, is Jesus's inability to answer questions, to give a straight answer. And I know how it's spun. He was so deep, he was so profound. His answers transcended the questions. But what if it's not that deep? And it's funny because you can take that very same Christian who is praising him for his genius, put them in front of the TV, I don't care which side of the political aisle they are on, they can watch a politician stand there and do the exact same games that Jesus did. The non-answering, the goalpost moving, the shifting, the counter questions, the blame game, the manipulation, and they can lose their mind, pull their hair out in frustration. Then they go to church and read about Jesus doing it, and all of a sudden it's brilliant. If a senator is accused of taking money and he gets asked point blank, "Did you take the money?" What if instead of saying yes or no, he said, "Well, what is money? And who truly owns it anyways?" Would you call that brilliant or slippery, manipulative, and dishonest? So today's video is going to be pretty simple. I'm going to give you a few examples from the Gospels, straight from the words of Jesus, where I can show you this kind of pattern. And by the way, to handle the objections before they come up, and then we'll dive right in, I understand that many men that I even admire, many great leaders and philosophers and deep thinkers throughout history have done similar dances and have been praised similarly. I mean, Socrates made it a method. Ram Dass and other Eastern mystics love to speak in riddles. All those modern motivational speakers love the mystery quote approach. You have to lose yourself to find yourself. What are you saying? It sounds pretty, it sounds deep, it sounds insightful, it sounds introspective, and there's a time and a place for that. For sure. But here's the problem. Jesus supposedly is not just a guru, a leader of a small group of men, or a philosopher. And according to Christian theology, understanding who Jesus was and what he said and interpreting it correctly is paramount for salvation. It's the key to eternal life and the avoidance of either destruction or torture, depending on your interpretation of other things Jesus said unclearly. Yes, Jesus' answers may have been thought-provoking, but in Christianity, you don't get points for pondering. You either get him or you're out for eternity. This is the highest that stakes can be. Should we not expect crystal clarity? Should we not expect actual answers? There's plenty of men in history who have been extremely succinct and straightforward. Martin Luther King Jr. did not mix words. He said things plainly and simply. Carl Sagan made it a point to explain huge ideas about the cosmos in simple ways so that even a child could understand. He could have veiled everything in mystery, but he wanted people to understand, to know. Marcus Aurelius wrote one of the most concise, no-nonsense philosophy books in history, and it was even his private journal, a place where he could have gone off on these tangents, but he understood the beauty and utility in simplicity, in practical application. So again, not trying to take any away from some of the honestly interesting and unique ways that Jesus handled confrontation. If we're trying to award him points for being politically smart or putting off his death for a few more years, he gets them. If you want to use him to show how someone in leadership can gain a following while being countercultural without stepping too far into that counterculture to lose the message altogether, yeah, let's talk about him. And that's the context of his time and place, and that's wonderful, and that's why as a human, and just a human, I have no more problem with him other than his incorrect teachings and harmful teachings than I do with Socrates, who also had some beautiful and interesting ways of saying things, but also had some problematic ideas and belief of his own. And we can judge them as men and talk about the good and the bad, but that's not what Christianity is. It is a claim of Jesus's perfection. It is a claim that he is the truth, and yet it is so hard to find from him. And if you don't think so, if you're telling me I'm wrong, please see this playlist here of Christianity is Confusing, where there is no doubt whatsoever that Christians themselves, forget atheists, forget people from other religions, cannot agree on any of the important doctrines of the Bible. So let's dive in. Let's start with an example toward the end of Jesus' endeavors. In Matthew 21, 23 through 27, you can get more context. But this is Jesus' final week. It's right after the triumphal entry. He just cleansed the temple, so tensions are high. By the way, the order here where he's cleansing the temple at the end of his ministry is in contradiction with one of the other gospels, but we won't focus on that right now. Jesus is being publicly challenged by the religious establishment. And now the chief priest and the elders are confronting him at the temple. They demand to know, and quote, "By what authority are you doing these things?" Again, referring to his teachings, his miracles, and especially the dramatic act of flipping the tables over in the temple. Did Jesus answer directly, even though it is a very straightforward and simple question? And when you consider, again, and I won't do this because it's too much, but please understand the context of these people who had the Old Testament and most of its part that they were utilizing to anticipate the messianic figure that Jesus clearly was not fitting. See this video here for a better understanding, a little sympathy. I'm not excusing the religious leaders of that day. There was corruption for sure, but they're not out of place in demanding to know from Jesus, okay, who are you? By what authority? Jesus' answer is, the baptism of John. Where did it come from? From heaven or from men? The question's a trap. And again, Christians love this. They're like, oh, he's so smart. How clever. Look at that. If they say from heaven, they indict themselves against not believing in John. And if they say from men, then they have to fear the public backlash because the crowd sees John as a prophet. So they plead ignorance. They say, we don't know. So Jesus says, neither will I tell you by what authority I do these things. So again, the apologist loves this. They claim it as a master class in rhetoric. They say Jesus is exposing the leaders here. They weren't asking in good faith, and so it's excused. Jesus doesn't owe them a correct answer. Well, what about everyone that supposedly Jesus and his Father would have known would be hearing these words for millennia? Again, going back to Jesus is not just claimed to be a guru or philosopher. We should have clarity. And even if he's not so forward thinking, which is pretty bad news for the Messiah of the entire world, there were other people in the crowd there listening who genuinely and honestly wanted this same answer. This isn't just about besting the Pharisees. It's a public moment of high stakes, and Jesus chooses silence. He chooses a game. He sinks down to their level. It's funny. I promise I'm not trying to get political, because if it was the Biden administration, I would also have an example. This stuff is constant within politics in general, which again is why it's such an ugly look on Jesus. But I just saw a video of Marjorie Taylor Greene being asked a question by a UK reporter, and she refuses to answer it.
Anybody else?
Should the Defense Secretary...
What country are you? Wait, what country are you from?
From the UK.
Okay, we don't give a crap about your opinion and your reporting. Why don't you go back to your country? Yeah, this is an American journalist. Thank you.
I'm an American, and I'd like to hear your answer to what she's asking.
I'm not answering her question.
It's under this pretense of you're not from this country, you have your own problems in your country, you can't genuinely be concerned. And even if all of that were true, the question is legitimate and many people still want to know the answer. So she's fighting this faux battle of integrity for not giving in to what she might even realistically view as a bad faith question. It's so frustrating because it's a game. It shouldn't matter where that person's from. It shouldn't matter if this question was coming from the Pharisees or the chief priest or anything like that. Everybody wanted to know, and Jesus would have known that. He's using their position as the excuse not to answer what he clearly doesn't want to. That's dishonest. That's deceitful. That's manipulative. But let's move on to number 2. This comes from John 18:33-38. This is Jesus's trial before Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor with the power to crucify or release Jesus. The Jewish leaders have handed Jesus over, accusing him of claiming to be king. This is a political threat that the Romans simply cannot ignore. And Pilate takes Jesus into his quarters for a personal interrogation. Forget how we know about what was said then. And he asks him directly, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus deflects. He says, "Do you say this of your own accord, or did others say it about me?" Non-answer. right? You can give a straight answer here. Are you or aren't you? Pilate pushes back. Am I a Jew? Your own nation delivered you. What have you done? Jesus gives another incredibly vague answer. My kingdom is not of this world. You say that I am a king. For this purpose I was born, and for this purpose I have come into the world. To what? To bear witness to the truth. So Pilate has a famous and honorable reply. What is truth? Now, you have a golden opportunity here. One of the most important and influential men at this time is asking, supposedly, the Son of God. Like, here is the showdown. What is truth? Jesus can deliver it. And however this message is getting recorded, he would have known it would have been for all people for all time. But what is Jesus' answer? Nothing. Not a word. He leaves the question hanging right there in the air, and a minute later, Pilate walks out. Now, the Christians, again, the spin is unbelievable. They consider this a mic drop moment, that Pilate wasn't truly seeking an answer. Again, assuming a bad faith questioner so that you don't have to give an answer and you can look like the virtuous one in the end. The silence of Jesus is really an answer from Jesus to the cynicism of Pilate, and yet these same Christians will commend Pilate for his sincerity and honesty and admittance later of who Jesus is. We have no reason to believe foul play from Pilate here, and even if Pilate, just like even if the journalist from the UK were not asking sincerely, a God with perfect foreknowledge could have, should have taken better advantage of this situation. But Jesus the man, and again, we're also acting like these things actually happened. This is the lore and legend that was built off of the life of Jesus if he did indeed exist. But insofar as Christians believe this, it doesn't make sense that this would be Jesus's non-answer, or it shows a different character than the one that they purport to continue to relish in. Others will give the excuse that Jesus couldn't give a straight answer to Pilate because it might have actually led to him not being crucified. But again, that's working backwards. Jesus could have ensured his death at any time. In fact, he had plenty of opportunities where he just disappears instead of getting thrown off the cliff or getting stoned, or he crosses the sea, and then it's like, oh, they don't care to try to kill Jesus anymore. Like, the plot devices are so insane throughout the Gospels, but it's a separate story. If Jesus is indeed the truth, as John 14:6 claims, this is the moment to show it. What is truth by the most powerful man? And you just let it slide. Once again, Jesus dodges what matters most. Let's get to the coin trick. This next example is one of the biggest exegetical papers that I did in Bible college. And again, I keep meaning to look for it so I can share this with you because I represented this story so very differently in that paper than how I see it now. I won't do all the backstory this time. You can read for yourself in Luke. Chapter 20, 22 through 25 is the direct exchange, but you can go back a little bit. Jesus is being questioned here. Is it lawful for us to give tribute to Caesar? That's the question. Pretty simple question. Jesus is coming. He's changing the game. He's supposedly sometimes correcting or upholding Old Testament law. He's a moral reformer who has a new idea for his chosen people. And so naturally, they are trying to understand the distinction between his authority and the actual authority. And Jesus answers with another question. That's his MO. And I should say, one important piece of context, at least according to the story, it is clear that this time people are actually trying to trap him. But Jesus is too smart for that. So he says, well, whose inscription is on this coin? And they say Caesar's, of course. And then comes the iconic line, render unto Caesar then what belongs to Caesar, and to God the things that are God's. What a genius rhetorical judo move that was. He flips the trap on his enemies. He's not a pushover. Jesus is a warrior. He separated the sacred from the secular in a single sentence. But look closer. Did Jesus actually answer the question? It's an important question, by the way, one that Christians still cannot agree with today. Jesus didn't give an answer. He gave a riddle, and riddles are open to interpretation and subjectivity and context changes over time, and it makes it almost useless. What exactly belongs to Caesar? Taxes? Allegiance? If Caesar demands that Jesus's followers go and preach Roman pagan mythology, should they? Give Caesar what's his. Your allegiance, your obedience. Well, obviously he wouldn't have meant that. Do you see how problematic it is? It's not actually practical advice that can be applied in a real world setting. It's a conversation stopper. Great, but nothing more. If it was truly meant as guidance, it failed. If it was meant as a quip to show Jesus's wit, Wonderful. He can have his Hitchens moment. By the way, the hilarious part is some Christians will use this verse to defend paying taxes, and others will use this exact verse to argue for Christian resistance against government. If people who believe in Jesus and read their Bibles and have the witness of the Holy Spirit can use Jesus's words here to do two completely opposite outcomes, then Jesus failed. This next verse got brought up a lot in this video where I talk about the issue with Jesus never writing anything down. Even though I specifically gave this verse in my video as a caveat, it didn't stop all the Christians from saying, actually, Jesus did write something down. And we see this in John 8, 3-11. So Jesus is teaching at the temple. The scribes, the Pharisees, they come and they interrupt him. They drag in a woman caught in the act of adultery. And they remind him, they quote to him, "In the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. So what do you say?" Now Moses got that law from who? From God. And who is Jesus? One with the Father, there at creation, part of the Holy Trinity. Was Jesus in another room in heaven when God and Moses were hashing out the penalties here? Is he unaware? Was he not part of the law? Did he not give this and intend for this? If Jesus is who he claims to be, this is a problem for him. The Pharisees know that. So you can get mad that they're trying to trap him, but you could also see it as an investigation into his claims. And I think it's a very, very, very fair question. But Jesus is in a pickle because if he says stone her, he contradicts his image of this compassionate and merciful moral reformer. He also risks violating Roman law, which forbade Jews from carrying out executions. But if he says don't stone her, he's denying the law of Moses, the very foundation of Jewish identity, and God's, and by association, his own commandments. The thing that strikes me, and again, I was a Christian and I was right here with you, the thing that strikes me the most about this is that Christians recognize the pickle Jesus is in. That's why they're so pleased when he gets himself out of it. But they never go back to, why is it a pickle? Yeah, Grady found a clever way out. Is that all you want? I think a lot of the time it is. That's why Christian apologetics works so well. There's a clear issue, but there's a slippery little way you can get out of it through semantics and posing and riddle. Is that your only goal? To maintain your faith no matter what and get out of the hard moments? Or is it to seek truth? Again, despite the personal motivations, I think the question from the Pharisee is seeking truth of the matter, and Jesus didn't give it. But what is his answer? Well, at first, he doesn't speak. He kneels down and he writes in the dirt. By the way, this vagueness also sparks centuries of discussion and debate. But they press him. They say, come on. And he finally says what? Let him who is without sin throw the first stone. The crowd goes wild. Even, and unfortunately, because I think he is so sharp in most of these matters, I heard Alex O'Connor just the other day talk about the ethical genius of Jesus because of this exact verse.
But he who's without sin casts the first stone. Oh man, it's brilliant. It's awesome. It's like ethical genius. It sort of undercuts at the same time as not contradicting the truth of the law or the justice. It's this brilliant moment.
And from the philosophy side, yeah, we can agree. Cool. You got yourself out of a pinch with wordplay. But from a seeking of truth, we see more evasion. He doesn't say if the law of Moses is right or wrong. He doesn't say that the woman is innocent. He doesn't call out the man's absence. Adultery takes two people. An ethical genius? How about the fact that Jesus, a product of his time and place, only saw the error here on the woman? He doesn't propose a better law or a system of reform. He simply sidesteps the issue by turning the focus onto the accuser's own sins, shaming people to get out of a tough spot. And then he walks away, leaving the woman's fate legally unresolved. This isn't mercy backed by principle. It's avoidance. It's actually abdicating responsibility. He leaves it to the crowd. If they stone her, it's on them. I thought Jesus was here to bear our burdens, to take on the weight of the impossibility of our sin. This is the last thing that should make Jesus looked up to. Matthew 15:21-28 is one I've explained many times, and it's when a Canaanite woman begs Jesus to heal her daughter. What's his answer? He could have simply said no, but he doesn't. And first, he's avoiding her, and the disciples are mocking her, and he's not doing anything about that. And finally, she's persistent enough that he says, it's not right to give the children's bread to dogs. And I don't care what excuses you want to make. This story is so clear that this woman who is not a Jew is of no consequence to Jesus. She is the dog, an insulting term on purpose that Jesus used knowing such, referring to his chosen people, his children, as the ones worthy of his miracles, blessings, healings. Now, she does persist and he finally helps her. And so again, the Christian spin on this is, oh, he was testing her faith. First of all, he didn't need to. Just like these other examples, it will tell you Jesus knew what was in their hearts, that they were coming to lay trap. He could have known. He didn't need to test her. Testing doesn't make sense for him or his father. Also, considering the context and circumstance of Canaanite versus Jew, maybe the Canaanite woman isn't the one to do this with, if you don't want to be accused of being racist here. Also, maybe don't specifically say that I have only come for the lost sheep of the tribe of Israel. And again, like Job, it is only when she humiliates herself and says to his pleasing, even the dogs get scraps from the table, that he says, oh yeah, no, good point, there. And he does it. So Jesus tried to deflect because that is his MO. But when she was so persistent, he had to come up with something else. And after he insults and humiliates her, he saves a little bit of face. That's your Jesus, the ethical genius. In Luke 10:25-29, we get this scene with a lawyer, a scholar of the Jewish law. He stands up to Jesus asking the million-dollar question, "Teacher, what shall I do to inherit eternal life?" And yeah, very similar to the last example. This is something that supposedly all Christians care about, what Jesus came to do, to make a way. And instead of answering, Jesus flips the question back on him. What is written in the law? How do you read it? The man answers with the 2 great commandments, which seems a little convenient to me. Again, probably some storytelling going on here, but love the Lord your God with all your heart and love your neighbor as yourself. Jesus replies, you have answered correctly. Do this and you will live. And then the follow-up, who then is my neighbor? And instead of answering plainly, Jesus tells a story, the famous parable of the Good Samaritan. So you have the priest, the Levite, and the Samaritan, and he asked the man, which of these 3 do you think proved to be a neighbor to the man who fell among the robbers? The lawyer says the one who showed him mercy. Jesus says, you go and do likewise. Now, this passage is celebrated for its stunning moral expansion. They say Jesus does answer who the neighbor is, that it goes beyond tribalism, beyond ethnicity or religion. He defines neighbor not by proximity, but by compassion. Ask them how they justify respecting the God of the Old Testament, who was all about tribalism, ethnic cleansing, and genocide, allowing only slavery from foreign neighbors, not from the in-group. Like, to admit that Jesus expanded morality past tribalism is to admit that God's original morality was based in ethnic racism. It's not the way you think it is, even if that were the case. And you know what? It's not the case. Samaritans still came from the northern tribes of Israel. They're just the black sheep of the family. It just doesn't do any of the things you want it to do. We'll do one last one that I think sums up this whole point, and I have mentioned it before, so I'll try to be brief. Mark 4:10-12. Jesus has just gotten done telling the parable of the sower, and his disciples say, why do you speak to the crowds in parables? And he says this, to you has been given the secrets of the kingdom of God, but for those outside, everything is in parables, so that they may indeed see, but not perceive, and may indeed hear, but not understand, lest they should turn and be forgiven. The Christian spin is, again, insane. Oh, Jesus uses parables to stoke curiosity, to challenge hardened hearts, and to fulfill prophecy, because he's also referring to something in Isaiah there. But he literally says he's speaking in parables so that people won't understand, so that they won't be forgiven. This is not mysterious wisdom. It's intentional misdirection. If someone deliberately withholds clarity so that others could not be saved, would you call that good? Whatever excuse is, if you're a Christian and you're actually answering this, that you're having to give right now, please examine those. It is gatekeeping salvation through cryptic storytelling with forethought expressed in this clear motivation from Jesus. God does the same thing, the Yahweh figure, Old and New Testament. In what world is this the same God and Jesus who both claim that they desire none should be lost? That's a mutually exclusive claim. Jesus had the opportunity to define salvation, to define truth, to clarify if we should still follow the laws of Moses, to explain the relationship between worldly governments and obedience to the Father. And in each of them, fails to bring clarity, fails to answer the question. It's not genius, it's manipulation. And it's not truth, it's deceit. It's not enlightenment, it's confusion. This is the Son of God, an eternal being, the definition of the truth, the way, and the life. I don't think so. So you tell me, is this Jesus being wise, or at best, Jesus being evasive. One thing is for certain. If God is not the author of confusion, Jesus didn't get that memo. Thanks for being here. I do appreciate it. I feel like anytime that we talk about Jesus specifically, it raises personal defenses and more things come out. I assume I'll get lots more threats of hell. I'm sure I'll just be told I don't know how to read the Bible, that I have the context wrong, while not being presented with how to correctly read the Bible or what the correct context is, but I wait to be surprised. I'll see you Tuesday with another takedown, and until then, keep thinking. I wanted to personally thank my top tiers of support: my Iconoclast, Alexander, Ann, Boris, GVI, Jimmy, Joe, Kitboga, Matthew, Perry, and Shawn; my Humanist heroes, Craig, James, Jarrod, Kristi, and Matthew; my Atheist advocates, Caleb, David, Drew, Jeff, Jeffrey, Julie, Malcom, Paul, Sparky, and Thomas; as well as all of my secular scholar patrons. If you believe in the mission of this channel, or you just enjoy its content, please consider joining these fine people.